Good evening. We are up to episode 38 in our Let's Play series of Space Engineers, version 1.190.101. I did some work off camera. I started it, I was just going to outline it, but then I got a little carried away doing the cargo summary screen. So we will go ahead and walk through the changes. I also did figure out a solution. I'm not completely happy with it, but it's a solution to the ice and hydrogen issue. The oxygen issue was significantly easier because the problem that we're having with hydrogen is that hydrogen engines do not have an inventory. And the way we check the conveyor connections is using the inventory. So a cockpit has an inventory, so we can check and see if the cockpit inventory is connected to the O2H2 generator inventory and know that there's a conveyor connection there, and then sprawl out from there to find the ice that's connected to that cargo. For the hydrogen engines, we don't have that option because they don't have an inventory that we can check the connections to. I have an idea for how to handle that, but it's a little bit complicated, so I'm not going to do it yet. For the time being, and with this ship in particular, it works fine because we have one unified hydrogen system, so we don't have to worry about, is there a dedicated hydrogen line for, one engine or another engine or whatever. So I'm not going to worry about it for the time being, but we will do that in a future episode. So changes that I made. First of all, I created this percent method right here because we've been doing this a lot, where we take the total, divide by the capacity, multiply by 100, convert it to string, and print it out with the percent sign. So I just made this into a static function so that we could do this without retyping the whole thing every time. Save a little bit of room was the main idea there. You can see in our update 100 block here, we are also calling the cargo summary on the cargo status panels, which we set up here, and we set up here. This is get surface 3 out of the main cockpit. I do also have an idea for making this configurable, so we can add some custom data to the main cockpit block, and that'll determine which screen stuff gets displayed to, so that we can transfer this program to different cockpits, for example, the industrial cockpit on the Mega Miner, and just say, okay, well, this is going to be the cockpit, first of all, and we're going to use, this surface as the oxygen status panels, this one is the cargo, this one is the power, whatever. I haven't done it yet, so that's another prospect for future development. Then we're configuring the panels, same as we do with all the other ones. And then all of this now is the same. I mentioned we're calling the cargo summary here. We'll get into the meat and potatoes of that one in a minute. So changes to display cockpit oxygen. We've got this. First of all, we're calling the percent function there, you'll notice. I mean, that's a minor thing. But then we've got this block right here. And this is, something else I forgot to mention. I defined some static. They're not really constants, because if you try to set them as a constant with this my item type, it complains. I'm not sure what about these means that you can't declare them as constants, but they're using all caps, so they're named as constants, even if they're not technically constants. But it's just a my item type for uranium ingots and a my item type for ice ore, even though there is no ice ingots, but whatever. Just so that we can reference those and use those without, again, needing to retype the whole thing every time we need to do it. And that's being used to search for ice in the connected gas generators, and we're defining the connected gas generators here by saying, first of all, are they connected, meaning are they on the local grid, or are they on a grid on the other side of the connector, because we just want the local stuff, at least depending on that flag. So if that flag is set, again, it'll just kind of blow through this. But then we're saying block get inventory 0. Now the block here is going to be the gas generators. They only have one inventory, so, and I mean, if one inventory is connected, the other inventories are connected. Like when you're just using the inventories to do is connected to, you don't have to worry about it. So is block inventory connected to the cockpit inventory? If it's not, return false. If it is, return true. So this is going to get all of the gas generators that are connected by a conveyor to the cockpit, and then search through those gas generators for connected items, namely ice, and find out how much we got. So that's that block, and then that is being thrown into the display panel for the oxygen. We're dividing it by 100, so it gets converted into megagrams, just because it looks a little bit neater on the display. Again, for the purposes of a quick summary panel, I think that was sufficient. So you can see there the unit is megagrams. And then this bit right here, I mentioned, and this is not really important for this ship, and it was just kind of frankly, it was basically done already because it's the same code that we're using for the hydrogen tanks, which I'll show you in a minute. Oxygen tank capacity, oxygen tank amount. Now this ship doesn't have any oxygen tanks, which is why we've got this little conditional statement here. It says if the gas tanks count as 0, just say none, otherwise get the percentage that they are full. So we're getting the gas tanks. Now the thing is this my gas tank type derives both into the oxygen tanks and the hydrogen tanks. There is actually a specific interface class for the oxygen tanks, but it doesn't add anything special, and it was easier just to reuse the code, so I didn't bother. First thing we are doing, block gets passed in as a grid terminal block, or an my terminal block. So like even if you're looking for gas tanks, the block comes in as a my terminal block, so we have to cast it here into a tank. If the tank is not connected, return false, we're not using it. And then we're going to check and make sure it's an oxygen tank, because if we're looking for oxygen, we don't want to count the hydrogen tanks. That doesn't make any sense. So if it's an oxygen tank, if the index of oxygen tank in the block type definition equals -1, meaning that we didn't find it, return false. So bail out if it's not an oxygen tank. And then for each gas generator that we found up here that we know is connected to the cockpit, because we used it to search for ice connections, but now we want to make sure that it's connected to the tank. And unlike hydrogen engines, tanks do have inventory. You can stick your bottles in there to get them refilled. So we do have an inventory here we can connect to. If the inventory is not connected to the generator, then bail. And we know that these generators already are connected to the cockpit. And if there's what's the transitive? There's a transitive property to conveyor connection. So if A is connected to B and B is connected to C, then A is also connected to C. So we know that these tanks now are connected to the cockpit. If they're not, then we're bailing. Then we get the tank capacity, and then the amount is the capacity times the filled ratio, and we return true, even though we're not actually doing anything with this list now, except for checking the count down here. We're actually doing the work inside of the filter function. You could argue that that's a bad idea, because this is supposed to be a filter function, but at the end of the day, it's looping through the whole grid terminal system. If we return true and then loop through the whole gas tanks collection, that's just doing the loop twice, and that's silly. So we're not going to do that. We're just going to do the work there. And then this is the same stuff that we had before being displayed. Display the ice, and that leads us with the finished product of the oxygen summary display right there, showing us oxygen status, the amount of oxygen in the cockpit, the amount of oxygen in the O2 tanks, and again, we have no O2 tanks on the ship, so it just says none, and then the amount of ice that is connected throughout the ship to gas generators that are also connected to the cockpit. So that's the amount of ice that we can use to generate oxygen if we need it, which is coincidentally the exact same amount of ice that we've got available to turn into hydrogen if we need it, because it's all one unified system in this ship anyway. There are definitely ships where that will not be the case, depending on how you design things. I tend to try to design my ship so that the conveyor system's all connected and we can move anything wherever we want to. I just like to do it that way, but if some design constraint prevents us from doing that in the future, we'll have code that can handle it. So then the power display, we made some changes here too. I don't think any of them are up here. We went over this part before where we have a list for the hydrogen engines and the reactors, and we add those in as we go through them to get their power stats and fuel stats and stuff. Then search for connected items. We're using the constant here for uranium ingots, so we don't have to type out the IMyType thing. Now here, this is the bit that we don't have the ability to do at this point, because right now we're doing pretty much the exact same thing that we did up in the oxygen display, but because the engines don't have an inventory, we can't check and see if the engines are connected to these gas generators. So we just want to make sure that they're on the same grid, and then that's good enough for the time being. Um, so then we'll search for all connected ice. That's our total ice mass. And then here we're doing, again, the exact same thing we did up for the oxygen tanks, except this time we're making sure that they're hydrogen tanks. If they're not hydrogen tanks, then we're bailing. So this is exactly the same thing. The only difference being that this total fuel capacity and total fuel amount already has a value started off from up here because there's already some fuel in the hydrogen engines themselves. So this is just adding the fuel that's in the hydrogen tanks to the fuel that is already in the hydrogen engines. Then we're outputting all the stuff to the power display panel, leaving us with this loveliness right over here, which again looks pretty similar to how it did before. It's just that all those numbers are now actually functional. Um, Before we go too much further, I did make some changes. I did some refactoring on the uh, search connected items method that cleaned that up a little bit. If I can find it, here it is. So you'll remember that this was a little bit longer. We were looping through basically all the blocks twice, and we didn't have the specific use case for not necessarily caring whether or not we were connected to everything, and only connected to at least one of the destination blocks. So I got that kind of all collapsed down into one loop. So now we're going through the blocks. If it's not connected, bail. If there's no inventory, bail. Now here we're initializing a Boolean called connected to any as false. And then we go through all the destination blocks. We say if the inventory is connected to the destination block, or if it's not, rather, if the inventory is not connected, then if we are requiring all, so if this parameter here where we're going to say you have to be connected to all of these destination blocks, as soon as we find a block that is not connected, we're going to bail out. Otherwise, we're going to say, okay, connected to any, well, this is an else condition on the connection. So if the connection is there, have been connected to at least one block. So then if not connected to any, bail. So basically this gets started off as false as soon as we find a connection to one of the destination blocks with the block that we're checking against. This gets set to true. This condition will fail, and we will continue through there. On the other hand, if we are requiring all, as soon as we find an inventory that's not connected, we bail, and we're done. So then once we get to that point, rather than looping through the collection that gets generated a second time, we're doing the math right here in the filter function again, basically looping through the block's inventories and adding the found items, everything that is in that inventory of the specified item type that we're searching for. Then we just return true, because I mean it doesn't matter here because we're done with this. We don't actually need this list to do anything with it, but this is basically saying that we found a block that's legit that we actually want to care about. But we're just going to return found items, which we initialized up here to 0, and we're adding 2 every time we find ice or uranium ingots or whatever it is that we happen to be looking for. So that's that. The read hydrogen engine fuel we went over already. The read charging battery max output we went over already. Now this is the new bit, the display cargo summary. And we're just taking in the display panels because we're actually going to find all the stuff that's connected, within the method. So start off with the heading, cargo summary. Now all these things are because we want to keep track of the different kind of storage. For example, if we're worried about how much space we've got left for ice, for example, we're going to have a little bit of extra room because we can stick ice in the O2H2 generators. If we're worried about ammo, those can only go in those have a little bit of extra room for storage in the guns. If we're worried about ore, whether it's stone or ice or whatever, we can, well, for all 3 of these, we have some extra storage space because we have storage space in the drill. Ingots, we have storage space in the survival kit. So, I mean, based on, what specific type of storage we're using, we may have a little bit of extra that we need to add in to basically say, there's some extra storage space that we can use to store this kind of um, item. So this is all being tracked separately. Storage is the amount that's currently in there. Capacity is the amount that it can hold. And whenever we find something in an inventory, the respective storage for it is going to go up because it can't be used. Whether it's ice or not doesn't actually matter. The point is that it could be ice, so we have a little bit less room available for ice. It could be stone, so we have a little bit less room available for stone. So that's how these different variables are working. There's 6 different types, so there's 12 different variables here, one for storage, one for capacity for each type. Then we're looping through all the storage blocks. Um, Now we're not identifying them as storage blocks because there's different kinds of storage blocks, so we're just doing all blocks, but then we're doing the filters. If it's not connected or it doesn't have an inventory, it's not a storage block that's on the local ship, so we're going to get out. Then we're going to save off the block definition because we're gonna be using that quite a bit. So the idea that we pull it in repeatedly and check it repeatedly is a little silly. So we're just going to pull it in once and then we're going to check it a few times throughout here. Now there's a couple of different inventories that we're not going to keep track of. One being tanks, because we're not keeping track of bottles. That's not really something that I think is particularly important, especially for the purposes of the colonizer. If we decide that we want to change that later, this is the line of code that matters there, because we're just going to go ahead and bail if it's a tank. Also, if it's a reactor, you can only put uranium ingots in reactors, and frankly, as much space is in there and as much uranium as we have in there, and as long as that power is lasting us, there's really no reason to keep track of the inventory for reactors. So I'm going to bail on reactors. Again, if we want to change that in the future, this is the line of code that matters. Now, every one of these blocks that we're going through at this point, because we passed through the has inventory check, we know has at least one inventory. So we're going to go ahead and pull that inventory, get the amount that's currently being stored in there, get the amount that could be stored in there. Now we're going to go through all of the various blocks that we have, and I wish there was a better way to do this. I did actually try. There's a method called um, get accepted items, but it doesn't actually track all of the items. I tried it on the survival kit, and the only things that returned to me were hand tools. So like obviously the survival kit inventories can accept more than hand tools, so I don't know what that method's supposed to do or if it's broken or what the issue is. But anyway, this is the best way I came up with to do it. There may be a better way to kind of clean this code up and consolidate it all down, but it'd be a lot harder to follow, so I'm not going to do that for the time being. If I think of something clever, some sort of bitwise mask or something, maybe, and that's, if you don't know what that means, don't worry about it. I'm not doing it yet. If I do end up doing it, I'll explain it at that point. So what we're going to do is we're just going to check the block type and read it. And if it's, the kinds of inventories that we know we have on here, we'll deal with it accordingly. So what this started out as was just this line here, unhandled storage block, and it was being echoed out, so I could go in and say, okay, I need to handle this. Okay, I need to handle this. Okay, I need to handle survival kit. I need to handle drill. I need to handle guns. I need to handle turrets, oxygen generators, cockpits, cargo containers, connectors. So these 3 here, the cargo container, the connector, and the cockpit, these are all OR conditions. So if it's any of these 3 types, it'll come into this space. And this is our general storage, so anything can go in here. So all 6 of our storage variables are being added to here. So we add the current inventory space being used for all of them, because if we're using inventory space in any of these 3 blocks, that's less storage space we have for ice, stone, ore, ingots, ammo, and miscellaneous components and tools and stuff. We can't put this stuff in any of these because there's already stuff in here. Doesn't matter what it is. So then we add to the capacity, again for the same thing, because we could put ice, stone, ore, ingots, ammo, ambit, whatever, words. Ingots, ammo, and miscellaneous components and tools and stuff. We could put all that in here, so we got to add to the max for that. So this is keeping track of all the inventory space we have that is general purpose anything. Otherwise, if it's an oxygen generator, this is the one I mentioned earlier, this is one that's only going to hold ice. You can't put anything else in the oxygen generator. You can put bottles, but again, we're not keeping track of bottles, so don't worry about it. Ice storage, ice capacity. Then guns and turrets, because they're labeled differently. Ammo storage, nothing can go in there except for ammo. Drills, nothing can go in there except for ore, but ice and stone are considered ores, and we want to keep track of those separately because ice can go into the oxygen generator, the gas generator, the O2H2 generator. It's got a few different names depending on which part of the code you're looking at. Stone storage, because the drills and the drills obviously, but the survival kit can take stone. We can put stone in the survival kit, so that's another place we can store stone if it comes to it. Or storage, because drills can hold all three generally. So that's with current, that's the max. Next, we got the survival kit. Now, the survival kit is a special case because it does actually have two inventories. So it can take stone and ingots in the first inventory, in the 0 index inventory that we've already got the values for. It can take ingots and miscellaneous components and things in the 1 index inventory, in the output inventory. So we've got to add to both of those, and we got to actually get the inventory. It probably would have been better for me to just do this up at the top once rather than going through this 4 times, well, 2 times, you know, once for current volume, once for max volume. But if I just got the inventory once and then saved the value off, that would be a little bit more efficient code-wise, but I wanted to make sure it was clear what was going on here. Now, there's going to be situations when we copy the script, or if we copy the script to other ships, where we're going to have assemblers, we're going to have refineries, we're going to have other little bits and pieces that will have cargo inventory that we're not at this point handling. So that gets echoed out as unhandled storage blocks, and we know we need to come in and edit the script to deal with that specific block type. Then we're printing all that stuff out, ice and stone, ore and ingots, ammo, miscellaneous, and the way that I arranged the lines there was just to make sure it fit on that screen. And that is it. This is our 3 summary screens. And I think this is going to be really helpful. I mean, I don't know how often we're really going to be using the Colonizer at this point, because we do have the Mega Miner, and it's significantly more efficient at collecting resources and whatnot. Although the Colonizer is pretty good as a general purpose little ship. I mean, we could very easily dock this up with a large ship with a jump drive equipped and take this to the moon, take this, you know, wherever we want to. Because it does have the hydrogen thrusters, it's got the survival kit, so I mean this is pretty much a replacement for the drop pod, you know, the respawn pod that we have at this point left the remnants of, meaning really just the battery, the respawn pod, down on the Earth-like planet. You know, when we first came in at the very beginning of the series, you know, 37 episodes ago, this has got all the things on there that it did, except this will actually fly. We don't have atmospheric thrusters, but we don't really need them because we've got an actual working hydrogen system. So we can take off from planets, we can land on planets, we can fly around in space with the ion thrusters, we can use the survival kit to kind of bootstrap whatever else we want to do there. We've got the drill. So like this is a very general purpose thing, and just because we're not using it right now, since we're kind of focused on space work right now, doesn't mean that this is suddenly useless. So the next things that we're going to want to do here is we're going to want to actually properly handle this issue with the connected hydrogen engines. Although again, I'm not sure how much of a priority that is, because all of the ships that we've got right now, whether it's the Colonizer, the Mega Miner, or even the, you know, the Space Industrial Complex, have one unified conveyor system. So like I can put anything from where I'm sitting right now in my personal inventory, I can put anything anywhere in any of those 3 ships. Now there are some constraints on the Colonizer, because we do have small conveyor tubes going through the connections in some places, so we can't pass components through those. But other than that, I mean, everything is connected. So we don't really have to worry about that now. So I might put that off and do that later. But my idea for solving it is a little convoluted, and it's not one I'm particularly happy with, because it basically requires kind of a mapping cycle where we go through and actually turn on the engines and see where it drains hydrogen from, or where it drains ice from, respectively. And then we'd basically keep track of that information using the custom data field here. So you can write, you know, anything in here, but there's a specific API called the MyINI interface or class or whatever that will parse the text in here like it's a, you know, classic INI file. Anybody who's been in computers for a while knows what an INI file is. It's basically a configuration. but it involves having headers to denote sections and then key value pairs. So we would be able to access headers key and it would tell us value. So we would be able to say, okay, hydrogen network, network ID 1, and we'd be able to say, okay, hydrogen engine 1 is on the first hydrogen network. What gas generators and hydrogen tanks are also on that hydrogen network, and then be able to determine with that, which hydrogen stockpiles and which ice stockpiles we have access to feed hydrogen engine 1 in particular. Because right now we're requiring that it have access to both. Actually, no, we're not. We're allowing it to have access to any. But the point is that it doesn't differentiate. Like the hydrogen engine in particular, it doesn't even know. So like we could completely disconnect the hydrogen engines from the O2H2 generators. I mean, we can't because it's pretty integrated in this particular ship. It's all kind of passing one into the other. But in the ship where we had, small conveyor tubes connecting things, if we disconnected the O2H2 generators from the hydrogen engines, the script wouldn't know it. So it would just think, oh, I've got access to all this ice to use to make more hydrogen, and I've got access to all this hydrogen in tanks, and then you'd be shockingly surprised when you ran out of hydrogen because the engine itself can't actually pull any of it in. Um, so we do need to fix that at some point. But I think the next thing that we're going to do, at least for this script, is I want to start setting up this main central panel. And this is going to be kind of like a menu slash control panel, um, and details panel. So like we'll be able to, set up some items on the hotbar here where we'll be able to send in commands that'll basically be able to parse through a menu and show us, details on power. So we'll be able to actually see, how many batteries do we have? What is the respective charge on all the batteries? How many hydrogen engines do we have? How much fuel's in each one of them? Kind of break it all out because this is all just summary information. So this is adding everything together and putting it all on one screen, in a way that it actually fits on one little screen. Same thing for cargo, being able to see what actual cargo do we have, like how much ice, where is it, in kilograms or megagrams. I mean, again, we've got that information up here on the oxygen in the power panels, but not for stone, not for ore, not for ingots. Like being able to actually see details there, and kind of parse through them. We're also going to want to have the ability to issue that command to go into mapping mode, to find out which hydrogen engines are connected to which parts of the hydrogen conveyor system. And will also be somewhat useful to do that for the hydrogen thrusters too, to be able to say, okay, these thrusters are connected to these hydrogen tanks, and we have this much fuel available for them. Um, that's not really something that we've had to worry about, again, because in this ship everything's connected. But at some point in the future, if we're doing a lot of planetary, flying around, and we're using the colonizer to do it for some reason, or we're using some variant of a hydrogen ship where the hydrogen systems are separated. The port side hydrogen engines are being fed off of one hydrogen system and starboard's being fed off another. We'll want to know ahead of time because the indicator we've got down there on the HUD is total altogether. So if we want to know, okay, the port side's running out of hydrogen, and we're not going to be able to maneuver the way that we're supposed to, if that side runs out, we want to know when that's going to happen. We want to know when it's coming up. Um, Excuse me. So we're going to get all that connected up at some point. Um, I also do want to start getting into some kind of autopilot-y things that I think scripting will be able to help us with, because we tried to do something with just using remote control, and it was a little sloppy, um, not very efficient in terms of uh, waypoints and coasting and whatever. So I'd like to set something up there, kind of a navigation control menu that we can access through here. Basically borrowing and outright plagiarizing a lot of concepts from Sam's Autopilot Manager. So shout out to the guy that wrote that. That's very impressive. I'm going to copy most of what you did. But we'll have some idiosyncrasies, and we'll be writing all of it ourselves. So I'm not going to copy paste his code or anything like that. I mean, that's not interesting or fun or educational. Um, but we'll go through and recreate that using a lot of the similar concepts, I think, uh, just as kind of a guide to the API mostly. But before we do that, I think the actual next step and what we will work on next episode is get some scripting into the Mega Miner. Because at this point, when we use the Mega Miner, all of the various controls for the drills are, kind of a sequence of things that I have to remember to do in the right order to get the drill started and start extending the piston, and then, get it locked into place appropriately so that the engines don't fry it the next time we try to move. So I am going to try to set up oh my god, the lag, set up the scripting block on the Mega Miner to do a lot of that automatically, so that we don't have to worry as much about, getting the sequence correct and flipping back and forth through hotbars. Oh my gosh, lag. But that is the plan for next time, is to script the drill on the Mega Miner. And then at some point in the fairly near future, wow, there you go. At some point in the fairly near future, we are going to do some work on the space industrial complex, because right now it's pretty naked. I mean, it's just, two fully upgraded refineries floating in space with an assembler, some batteries, and some cargo containers holding everything together. We'll turn this into a little station, put some armor blocks around it, make it all airtight, uh, get some O2 H2 generators on here so that we can pressurize the environment. Maybe even set up some oxygen farms so that we don't have to use ice to breathe. Um, in fact, maybe I'll do that next time, because I'm trying to distribute out the scripting stuff a little bit so that it's not overwhelming and it doesn't kind of detract from anybody who may be more interested in the Let's Play aspects of the series than the scripting aspects. But, fair warning, there's going to be a lot of scripting here, because I am a computer programmer and I do enjoy the scripting. And at the end of the day, once you get to a certain point, especially if you don't have a mod like scarce resources or whatever, where you have a specific, goal to get to the moon, wherever it is right now, or the whatever planet that is, or to get to a specific spot so that you can get resources. Like, if you don't have scarce resources requiring you to do that, it comes a point where you're just like, all right, I can pretty much do what I want now. What do I do? So I think I'm going to spend a lot of time doing scripting stuff and, finding various cool ways that we can try to automate things, using the scripting blocks. So that's kind of going to be the direction that this Let's Play series takes. So if you're not a fan of the scripting stuff, I'm sorry about it, but, there's going to come a point where that's going to be pretty much exclusively what we do. But that is not today. It'll be a little while before we get there, and if that does happen, I might start to thin out the episodes specifically for space engineers, so that we're, maybe doing one episode a week of space engineer script work. And, if there's any intermittent stuff that we can do throughout the week, great, but otherwise I'll start playing another game. Maybe do some Kerbal Space Program or some Crusader Kings or something like that. So in that spirit, again, what I was saying before I got distracted, warning everybody that I'm going to do a lot of scripting, uh, to kind of space that out a little bit, I think next episode we will actually do some work on the space industrial complex, especially because we have so much iron. Oh my gosh, all the iron that we have, because we took the Mega Miner out, remember, to look for an iron deposit, because we were actually running short of iron. Those were the days. So now we have 281,000 kilograms of iron, all from that mining run, and most of that came from stone. Some of it did come from actual iron ore once we finally got to the deposit, but most of it came from stone. So we're going to use some of this up, is the bottom line. Use some of it up, to put some armor blocks around here and make it pretty, or at least airtight. And that's, something else fun that we can do in terms of scripting is we'll be able to set up an airlock uh, to control that process. Um, so that is going to require a little bit of a redesign up here because these connectors are not airtight. The large cargo containers I don't believe are airtight either. So what we'll do is we will take both of these ships off, move them up a little bit, put a conveyor junction in between the large cargo containers and the connectors because those are airtight. And then we'll be able to build around that. And that will then be able to seal by just building armor blocks and stuff around the conveyor junction. Anyway, that's the plan for next time. I'm going to keep this episode relatively short since I already wrote the code and I just had to review it this time. Um, I'm interested in your thoughts on that. I mean, I think that there's an advantage to actually watching me write the code and the problems that I come across and figuring out how to fix them. I think that that's probably helpful to some people, but at the same time, it tends to drag the episodes out because I'm trying to actually get something done in the episode instead of just being like, oh, well, I spent 20 minutes trying to figure out how to spell the property name, and now the episode's done by. So it does tend to drag out the episodes a little bit to do things that way. But let me know in the comments how you feel about that. Do you want to actually see me write the code, or you just want to see me walk through it once I'm done? I'm happy to do either way. Although, I do tend to get a little distracted sometimes tinkering with stuff and write more code here than I intended to off camera. So let me know how you think about that. Subscribe so you can see what happens next. Again, we're going to be doing the Space Industrial Complex next time. Likes, comments, and verbal abuse are always welcome. Thanks very much for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.